Welcome, everybody. How are you all doing? How's everybody? Chag Chanukah Sameach. Chag Sameach. So it is Chanukah. So we're going to start quickly by lighting the Chanukiah over there, and we're actually going to use the lights of the Chanukiah to explain one of the important concepts today. And sometimes we may remember Chanukah as being kind of a children's holiday, a kid's holiday. But in fact, if you've looked at any other meditative traditions, most traditions have some variation on meditating on a flame or on a candle. And if we approach this as adults and as spiritual seekers, you may notice Chanukah also is an 8-day candle meditation each night. We're meant to actually sit and gaze at the candles for 30 minutes. And I'm going to introduce a divine concept that we include in the meditation. And feel free, if you get bored with the class, just look over there and, something else to do. But feel free, certainly in your own time, if you're around a Chanukiah, to perhaps take this meditation and use it exactly in that way. So Jordan, if you want to help us out, I'll help you with the blessing. Nice. Yeah, you can lift this up and hold this. Together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Chanukah shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim she'asani lavotenu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh. Just touch them and lights. Ma'osur yeshuati lechana elishabeach tikon beitefilati V'sham toda nezabeach le'etachin matbeach mitzaham nabeach azegmor b'shir mizmor Chanukah hamizbeach. Yasher koach, Jordan. Beautiful. So have a look and notice they're not your normal candles. But the lamps are actually filled with olive oil, and there's a wick inside each of them. So have a good look. We're going to get back to these lamps in just a moment, but beautifully done. And just to review where we're at, last week we looked at, first of all, looking at the model of body, mind, and soul, and what they each are. And Adam, if you please bring up that first slide. We talked about the soul being an umbilical cord that flows from right here where we are, time, space, consciousness, real life, right? All the way up through these 4 spiritual worlds until finally it flows out of the Ein Sof. And we talked about the body as being something like a spacesuit for the soul. The soul is spiritual and needs some vehicle to travel around time and space. That's the body. And the body has 2 frequencies on which it can transmit. What are those 2 frequencies? Anybody?
AM and FM?
AM and FM, right? Or? Not the sefirot, just more generally, like the 2 combinations, intellect and emotions, right? So you have 2 categories, intellect and emotions, and you see the same 2 categories when we look at the sefirot, intellect and emotions. And the mind, we said the mind is what the byproduct when the soul flows through the brain. Right? Quick definitions. We looked at 2 meanings of Kabbalah, right? The first is having to do with the more understood definition, which is reception, receiving. So there's something we receive, something you receive from your grandparents when you're a baby. It's not in the words, it's not in what they're teaching you, it's something above that, grandparenting, right? We transmit it, we receive it. Same thing happens with the mystical aspect of the Torah, and it's been passed on from teacher to student, and we can each, in our own way, at our own level, receive that and even transmit it a little bit, depending on where we're at. However, there was a different definition based on the root, which had to do with correspondences. So look at last class if you want to see more about that. We're creating correspondences between what we do understand, like relationship, friendship, marriage, light, all these relationships we understand, finding correspondences above in the spiritual world, and by understanding the relationship between the parts here in the physical, we get a sort of inner sense of what's happening in the spiritual. So Kabbalah finds ways to create correspondences and jump over that leap above my consciousness. Then we looked at how do you define the sefirot? What is a sephirah, right? And we said it's not, God forbid, the Jewish chakras. In fact, the whole world is just a metaphor in relation to the sefirot. So the body itself is just a metaphor expressing something about the structure of the sefirot. Because God creates everything, as it were, through the sefirot, the whole world takes on something of their structure. So we can see how the body reflects the sefirot, but there's no point on my arm that's Devorah, there's no point on my forehead that's Chesed. It doesn't work that way. The best way to define sefirot is through 3 different meanings of the root. Right? Anybody points if you remember any one of the meanings? Anybody? What were they? 3 words we talked about? Oh, not the sefirot themselves, but the word sephirah comes from the root. What was that? Sapir. Ding, 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 ding. So one of the ways we can use the root, very good, is sapir, which means sapphire. And so on the level of the Ein Sof, on the level of divinity, the sefirot are like these glowing emanations that flow out of the light of the Ein Sof, completely united with it, but still somehow united in there. There's 10 sefirot. And now, any remember any of the other 2? No? Pardon me? Both. The consciousness in terms of sipur, story, and counting in terms of mispar. Right? So these are 2 other definitions or ways of getting at what the sefirot are.
With books or stories?
Exactly, yeah. So I'm experiencing in consciousness something like a story. I'm like a character in a book. I'm flowing through time. And the sefirot are constructing that for me. They're creating my consciousness. So within me, they function as a story or an author. And then number, that's within the world. They function as the matrix out of which the world continuously emerges from the spiritual. Yeah. Danelle, I think I turned the heat up a little too high, possibly. Yeah, maybe let's split the difference there. You like it? Like it? Okay, let's yell out if it's. And then we finally looked at the first 3 of the sefirot. And Adam, let's please go to the second page here, page 56 on Practical Kabbalah. Now we've expanded our point of view of the soul just a little bit here. So whereas on the first page you saw the spiritual umbilical cord as one line, here you see the 10 sefirot flowing down, and wherever our soul is active at that time, the 10 sefirot are there also. So the 10 sefirot flow with all this divine light, come with our soul, and flow through each of these worlds, and they create us, or God creates us through them, as well as the worlds. So wherever you are, if you're some lofty being like Moshe, you experience the sefirot as they are in Atzilus. But if you're me, you're experiencing them in time, space, and consciousness. So the physical world, my actual consciousness, and my vision of godliness, however basic that may be. That's the sefirot. Is there a free chair over here? There you go. So we looked at the first 3. Let's please go to slide 3, 165. Once again, to avoid confusion, we're not discussing Cantor pretty much in this class, because that is above consciousness. We're dealing with how we can consciously engage with the sefirot. So leaving out Cantor, the first 3, which were the intellectual sefirot, which we looked at, Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat, we divided intellect into 3 aspects. And keep in mind, as we said, in Kabbalah, states of consciousness are very, very distinct. So Chokhmah is not Bina, and Bina is not Dat, and Dat is not Chokhmah. Right? So we want to start to train our consciousness to create new categories that are not overlapping like we're used to in English, but rather are clearly delineated, and there's no wash from one into the next. So remember, what was Chokhmah? How would you describe it in English?
Spark.
Spark. Very good. Spark, but a spark of what? Wisdom is good. Wisdom is good. Can fill in the details a little more for anyone watching.
Light.
Okay, that's how that's how the light gets into your consciousness. Yeah, as a spark. What's that?
Your intelligence.
Intelligence, but what kind of intelligence? Right. So.
Your thoughts?
Not thoughts yet. This is all before thought, right? All of intellect is happening before thought. Thank you. Inspiration. It's inspiration, right? So there's a moment, yes, a spark, yes, intelligence, but it's a moment of inspiration, and what's not there is comprehension. So here's the clear delineation. Chokhmah is inspiration with zero comprehension, right? In English, if you say inspiration, you don't mean that, right? Inspiration, I understand. Chokhmah, there's no comprehension. It's a different phenomenon, completely separate. Not separate, it's completely distinct. Right, so Chokhmah is inspiration with zero comprehension. A moment later, there's some comprehension. Now it's no longer pure Chokhmah. Bina, we described as what? Understanding, right? So this is actually, now I comprehend, now I get it, and I can analyze, I can put into categories, I can crystallize, I can expand. So I take that spark of inspiration, and I fill it out, and the details emerge, I force them out. Much like we said, the seed in reproduction from a man enters the womb of a woman, and now the details that were hidden in the seed emerge and become more and more and more details, so you get a full-fledged being. Right, so that's Chokhmah and Bina, inspiration and understanding. But now I have no connection to this process yet. I have no connection to this intellectual phenomenon yet. How do I get a connection to it? Duh. Which knowledge may fool us. As we said, it's not a collection of facts. It's more connection to the information. So do I care about it? Does it connect to me? Do I relate to it? Have I become one with it? Right? Another way of describing it is when you're first learning something, there's a gap. I'm trying to learn algebra, and I can't get it. But by the time I know it, now it's in me, and ask me a simple algebra that I've studied, and boom, I don't have to think about it. So the closer you get to knowledge, the more you know it. Now there's no gap. Now dot has fired up, and now the knowledge is one with you. Right? So connecting to it emotionally, and also in terms of being entirely one with it. So that's the intellectual. Before we begin our tour of the next three, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet, I want to actually introduce a key concept that is going to help us organize and put into perspective and even make useful all the stuff we're learning. And that is the teaching that we actually don't have one soul. Right? There's one God. We're definitely about oneness when it comes to the Shema. When it comes to the soul, Kabbalah actually teaches that we have a second soul as well. One of them is called Nefesh, the godly soul, Nefesh Elokit. The second is called Nefesh Bahamit. And so if you look at our next slide here, ooh. Everyone in the office is wondering what that was when we started putting the art together. So there's our two souls looking at each other. One of the souls, the godly soul, is completely interested in this direction, right? How can I contribute? How can I help someone else? How can I extend? And it's also interested in this direction, if you like. How can I reunite with Ein Sof? How can my soul elevate and rejoin its source? You know, maybe a little less heat. Yeah, we're not yet. No, I feel like I'm in a nice sauna. It's good. So this first soul, the Nefesh Elokit, that's all it cares about is how can I contribute and help people around me? How can I flow outward? And also, how can I reunite with my source as a soul? The second soul, Nefesh Bahamit, is in this direction. Right? How can I take care of myself? How can I survive? How can I fulfill myself? How can I have fun? Right? How can I expand myself? And we're not saying Nefesh Bahamit is bad or evil. It's part of the picture that we need, but it's selfish in the most absolute terms, the way a baby is selfish. Right? You don't blame a baby for being selfish. I don't know if you saw, what's his name, CK the comedian, Louis C.K. did a whole thing about babies. They're such jerks. He used a more colorful word, right? You know, he said, that, yeah, I mean, he's hungry in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. and he just cries and wakes up the whole house. What a, right? And he has this whole routine. It's very funny, but we don't think about it. A baby who is in some distress or hunger or whatever will just yell at the top of their lungs in the middle of the night and wake up the whole house. If you or I did that, people would start asking all kinds of questions, right? Not appropriate. But when a baby does it, of course a baby does it. Why? Because they're all nefesh be'amit at that point. Pure nefesh be'amit. And that's not an evil thing a baby needs to survive. It's what they should be doing. It's positive. It's needed. As we get older, however, that purely self-centered drive wants to find a new compass bearing, because the self-centered drive doesn't really ever develop its own compass bearing, nor does it develop limits. So that's what bar and bat mitzvah is, by the way, is when that second soul, the godly soul, comes into consciousness, and we can start to use it to train the nefesh be'amit to find a new compass bearing. So let's read a little bit of how Label introduces this topic. You turn to page 76 in Practical Kabbalah. And let's do this. The whole one. We start going this way. You comfortable reading?
I can
From
read.
time to time, right there.
Thanks.
Nice and loud for our microphone.
From time to time, we all catch ourselves thinking, this isn't really me acting like this. It's not like me to be so cranky. Why am I trying so hard to impress? Why am I moping around? What's going on? In that moment of clarity, a truer part of ourselves takes hold and brings honesty to our inner vision. Our inner being has taken a look at our outer manifestation. But why can't our inside be our outside all the time? Why are we all so oblivious of our truer selves?
It's strange. I don't know if you relate to this phenomenon. We seem to sometimes have two people inside of us. I'm being myself, I'm being who I want to be. Sometimes something happens outside, a trigger. Suddenly, I'm saying this stuff, and I'm thinking this stuff, and feeling and doing this stuff. And then a moment later, who was that? Why would I say that to the person? How could I be so immature? And then I have to go and apologize. Why is there this duality? If I have a sense of who I should be, why aren't I that all the time? Why is that so hard? Have you ever sat and wondered? If we have in our mind an idea of what's proper behavior, why can't I just behave that way all the time? Why should that be so hard? It's because we are actually two souls, and there's a tug-of-war going on. And learning how to manage that duality is very important in learning how these sefirot actually become useful in life. Go ahead.
Our aim is to learn to use the Chachma spark wisely. If the spark is drawn from wisdom, it burns truly. If, however, we allow ego and insecurity to tap into Chachma, then the fire it creates is fed by a false image of ourselves. This inner duality of ego and selflessness is called in Hasidic terms nefesh
Be'amit. Yeah.
beat, and nefesh elokit. These terms translate to mean the animalistic soul and the godly soul, the source of challenge and inner conflict.
All right, so you remember we had that first Sephirah Chokhmah, and that's the beginning of any conscious moment, any realization. And so in the end, any word that we speak, any thought we have, any action we do, it initially came from a spark of Chokhmah. And that spark of Chokhmah, as we said, the way we fish in consciousness for our next what's going on moment, our next realization, that determines everything else. And both souls have all 10 sefirot, right? That's what makes it so complex. So just because something is a spark of Chokhmah and comes from a very spiritual place that's above my consciousness, doesn't mean that it's nefesh elokit. It can also be nefesh be'amit, which also has Chokhmah. And so if nefesh be'amit is sparking Chokhmah, that means I look at a situation, I think, what's in it for me, right? How can I enjoy the situation? How can I benefit more from the situation? Sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in obvious ways. So learning primarily how that Chokhmah spark is sourcing and which soul is actually having its a moment of inspiration, that's the key to saying which of these souls is going to flow through all of our sefirot. I want to go ahead, next paragraph.
I'm sorry.
The nature of human. Yeah.
The nature of human motivation has everything to do with a quest for becoming one, both within and with each other. We're always facing a fork in the road as we struggle with two competing spiritual inclinations. The first is the quest for physical survival, maintenance, and self-importance. The second is the realization that there is more to life than sustenance and self-glorification, the deeper meaning of relationship. The nefesh behemoth, the animalistic side of the soul, is responsible for the drive for self-preservation. Initially, it is the quest for food and shelter. When these needs are satisfied, it becomes self-perpetuating search for enhanced creature comforts and self-aggrandizement. On the other hand, the nefesh elokit, the godly side of our soul, connects us to higher aspirations and unity with another soul.
So, nefesh bamit, in Judaism, as I said, we don't see it as a negative. We don't want to crush it. We don't want to destroy it. We actually need to continue to take care of ourselves. We want to have a home. We want to have food. We want to have good relationships. However, once we have enough, that's where we call a nefesh elokit, this other-centered soul, and we say, let's find a compass bearing. Let's see what around us needs helping. Let's see how I can connect to higher aspects of the cosmos. And what's a little bit tricky is that as people that are interested in spiritual growth, as people that are seekers, we tend to think a lot in terms of self-actualization. And what a great goal, right? Instead of earning a lot of money, I want to gain wisdom. Instead of buying a nice car, I want to learn how to meditate and encounter higher spiritual realities. I want to expand myself. I want to self-actualize myself. This is kind of new age spirituality. This is a good thing, right? And certainly it's better than getting caught up in just the materiality of life. However, self-actualization still begins with self, right? Self-actualization versus other-centeredness. That's what we're talking about. So even though I may be having a very spiritual experience, and I may be expanding my consciousness, and I may be having more and more spiritual awareness, if it's all about self-actualization, I have to ask myself the question, who's having that self-actualization? Who wants to have that expanded awareness? And it's very key, because nefesh b'amit is not, if nefesh b'amit knows that I'm a spiritual guy, it's not going to dangle, you know, $1,000 in front of me and try and get me to get obsessed with that. It's going to dangle a retreat in front of me and get me to obsessed with that. Nefesh b'amit just wants the energy to keep flowing inwards. And if I'm interested in spirituality, nefesh b'amit will get interested in spirituality and will take spiritual classes or teach spiritual classes and will strengthen itself that way. So we want to be quite clear that experiencing, how about this? The higher you go into the spiritual worlds, you're not seeing any more of God, right? God is no more in the spiritual than in the physical. Some people think if I rise higher and higher and higher in the spiritual, somehow I'm seeing more and more of God. But the spiritual worlds are just that. They're worlds, and God's equally hidden in the spiritual as in the physical. And often, we're actually closest to God, not when we're having an elevated spiritual experience, but actually when we're having a pretty dismal or humdrum physical experience. And so let me illustrate. Say I've been waiting 3 months for a retreat from my teacher. I'm excited, you know, to go for 4 days, you know, to just have peace and quiet and learn lots of spiritual stuff and meditate and come back a refreshed person and a better person. And as I'm about to leave my house, I get a phone call, and one of my friends, God forbid, had an accident or is ill and is in the hospital, and you know they need somebody to come and visit and help with the kids and this and that. And here I am. This whole weekend I've been waiting for is up in the air. Maybe I can get somebody else to take care of this. Which should I do? I have a choice, A or B. Now, I'll give you, A may be the more spiritual choice, right? I go on this retreat. I'm going to learn things I didn't know. I'm going to be calm and relaxed. I'm going to come back to life more spiritual. I may have wonderful, pleasurable spiritual experiences. B is going to be a drag. I'm going to be up all night. I'm going to be at the hospital. I'm going to be running around, getting a kid this and driving somebody there. It's a really boring physical experience, right? But which one puts me closer to God, right? Give me a break, right? Where am I supposed to be? How am I needed?
I have a question.
Yes.
What if you don't have to make that choice at the moment? Let's say you're just going to the retreat.
Yeah.
So then what happens? And you just go to the retreat, so then it's just a self-fulfilling kind of thing, as opposed.
Then it becomes more subtle, right? It becomes more subtle. So say situation didn't arise. I'm going to the retreat, and now it's up to me, right? When I'm there, who is it that's there and why, right? So this is a much more subtle question. Am I there because I enjoy it? Am I there because I want to have the experience? Am I there because perhaps even I feel better with myself when I'm more spiritual? Or am I there because this is going to help me now in life, take care of my family, be dedicated to the people around me, be less reactive? So there, now it's up to me. And you can still, the compass, it's a finer and finer balance as you get higher and higher, but it's always there. No matter how lofty or spiritual an experience, this reality of nefesh elokit, nefesh b'amit, we always want to ask ourselves, who is it that wants this? Is this for me, or is this what needs to happen for the world? Nefesh elokit, nefesh b'amit. Took a little longer on that than I wanted to, but let's visit our Hanukkah lamps here. I'm going to share with you a meditation from, this is from Rabbi Dov Ber of Lubavitch. He is actually, we're not learning his text. He's labels teacher, if you want to put it that way. He's a great master of Kabbalah and Hasidus, and he writes deep, deep books on meditation, probably the most profound book on meditation I've ever encountered on Jewish systems of meditation. One of them that he gives here is a meditation on candles, especially pertinent at Hanukkah. So if we can get a close-up here, I don't know if we can, of these lamps. You want to get, can you drag that in, get real tight? You want to see like every detail if it's possible? There you go. So when we look at these candles, in Eastern meditation, often you're directed to simply gaze at the candle and look at yourself in the candle with no thought. And eventually, if you've experienced this, the observer becomes the observed. You recognize that the split between you and the candle is not what you thought it was. You were seeing reality in a distorted way. And if you still your mind, then the barrier between the observed and the observer falls away, and it's a different kind of place. And you certainly have spiritual responses to that, right? In Judaism, when we clear the mind, it's not to simply erase the boundary between the observer and the observed. And we don't leave the mind completely empty. We always insert a divine concept into the mind, and rather than having the mind stay empty, we fill the mind more and more full on the side of Bina, on filling in the details of this divine concept, until the mind is full and nothing else can enter the mind. And we stay there with the divine concept enriching the mind and deepening our connection, but not simply experiencing the spiritual oneness, but leaping above it, hopefully, to try to get an inner sense of godliness. Yeah? So the meditation that the Mittler Rebbe suggests for the candles is this. When you look at a lamp, like this, right? There's four aspects that he describes in the lamp. One of them is the oil, which is in the lamp. Can everyone see that well enough? The second one is the wick. If you look at these, there's a nice, beautiful wick flowing through each one. And the third and fourth are contained in the flame. If you look closely at the flame, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, right at the wick, there's a dark radiance, a dark fire, and then around it, there's a white, a bright radiance. So the flame is also separated to two parts. So there's four aspects that we're meditating on as we're gazing at these Hanukkah lamps. The wick, the oil, and then the light and the dark aspects of the flame. The flame represents my soul. Right? The flame represents my soul. There's a lot in common with it. It feels like it's an ethereal being just looking at it. It's always flickering upwards, wanting to reunite with its source. And so naturally we know a flame is connected to the soul. But the two colors of the flame actually correspond to the two aspects of the soul we're talking about, the two souls. Nefesh elokit, that sense of divine ecstasy that almost surrounds my consciousness, that's that bright flame. And then the dark flame, the dark radiance, that's the way Nefesh Elokit actually invests itself in Nefesh B'amit, because Nefesh Elokit has to actually flow through the animal soul to actually speak and use the body. And when it does with the divine concept, now my actual physical brain can have physical thoughts about a divine concept, and my physical heart can feel physical emotions about a divine concept. So not the spiritual intellect and emotions of the divine soul, but my actual physical thoughts and real physical emotions. So as you look at the flame, perhaps consider for the rest of Hanukkah these two aspects, these two souls we have, the divine soul and the animal soul, working together. And then the other aspects of the meditation, the wick is actually our body. And the flame looks like it wants to kind of leap off the wick, but of course if it did, it would vanish, it wouldn't be there. Same with our soul. Sometimes you have a sense your soul wants to return to its source. This physical stuff is just so, right? But if the soul did that, God forbid, it would have no experience anymore of what's going on. The soul needs to be attached to the body to have experience. And finally, the oil is that first sphere we learned about, chokhmah. Chokhmah drawn from a proper source, right? So inspired chokhmah. So perhaps we'll come back to this at the end, but I want to leave that with you. This is really a powerful, powerful truth that we have two souls, and as we go through all this spiritual content, please keep in mind, if I'm learning this because I think it's fun, then it may be my Nefesh B'amit that's just taking my Kabbalah class, right? I want my Nefesh Elokit to be taking my Kabbalah class, which means how can I use this to be a better father, a better friend, a better servant of my community, whatever that means to you. Any questions about this? Thank you, Chanukia! Thank you. So there's it's really, a lot of this is art. And my son told me, do you know why you can't trust artists? Right? Because they're shady. And they're sketchy. And they're always framing people. I know. I ran out of time. I couldn't find better jokes. Sorry.
I nodded off. Sorry.
There you go. So let's take. Great. We have perfect amount of time. Let's look at the next three sefirot. So you can pull up Mr. Chesed. Have a look at that. So if you were at Label's talk, he talked a little bit about what is an emotion. What is an emotion? And in North America, it's a little bit hard for us to sit down and define what an emotion is. I've seen in his videos, he'll sometimes take 5 minutes and ask a class to try and define what an emotion is, and it seems to just evade us. Again, because in English, emotions are very wishy-washy and one move into the other, and even the word emotion, we all know it directly what the experience is, but what it really is, we haven't really pinned down. States of consciousness, in our North American perspective, are not so distinct. So let me introduce a definition Label has used, that an emotion is that part of our being that adds energy to its intellectual antecedent. So an emotion is that part of our being that adds energy to its intellectual antecedent. So as we said, if I have information in my mind, that can stay on an informational level, and I will never care about it, I will never feel about it, I will never do something about it. I won't even speak about it necessarily. Once dot fires up, now I start to feel something. What's happening? That intellectual phenomena is now gaining energy from my emotional sefirot, or from the midot, as we'll call them within consciousness. And that could be one of two main ones, and then they flow together to form a third one as well. So this whole part of the tree of life, it's about how we take an intellectual result, and then finally determine how my emotions should flow about it, and allow those emotions to flow in the right ratio, so that then I can move out in the world with integrated and balanced intellect and emotions, and hopefully behave in a more masterful way as well. The first one, chesed. Chesed is described as loving kindness, and chesed again is this direction also, right? Contributing, giving, joy, celebrating, all of that is my chesed flow. On its external creative side, it's called loving kindness, contributing. And then the inner experience of it is actually love. Love. And chesed is a major, major piece. It's how everything begins in terms of creation. And it's really, we want to favor it in all of our life's paths. It's always good to lean on the side of chesed. However, in the West, sometimes we think that really that's all there is, right? The famous Beatles song, "Love is all you need." We're very enamored with the idea of love in New Age mysticism. And I want to caution ourselves that for Kabbalah, love is not the whole picture. Love is not big enough. And love on its own is actually basically non-functional, right? If you have just chesed flowing on its own independently, full chesed, you're going to live a very imbalanced, almost insane life. To get the full picture, you want to integrate all of the sefirot, and certainly the 3 emotional sefirot. So let's take a look at label page 120, and we'll introduce ourselves to the midah of chesed, of loving kindness. Let me pick up from your giving nature.
I don't mind reading out loud. I did not bring my glasses.
Oh, so if for any reason anyone doesn't want to, okay. If for any reason anyone doesn't read a rule in my class, please just ask the next person. No.
Looking at it from another point of view, that of spiritual growth, we can extrapolate that our feelings can physically alter the body's pathways through which our spiritual flows gain expression. In fact, we are a seething cauldron of spiritual sephirotic flows that are influenced by the body's conscious and unconscious processes. The way we choose to interpret the moment, mind, sets in motion a set of feelings, emotion, which may result in damage to the body or its repair and well-being.
It's a very important point. Label, often being a psychologist, talks about the sefirot and health. And if you look at any studies of mind-body medicine, we recognize that the mind and the emotions are one of the most powerful factors in how our body is doing. And that simply having that spark of chokhmah, that everything happening around me is for a purpose, and deciding to lean on chesed, can actually have a huge effect on my body's health, no question. Yeah, and so now specifically chesed.
Your giving nature. Chesed is the emotion of giving and sharing. When we reach out to a person in need, we are drawing on our chesed flow. It is the basic cosmic flow with which creation is imbued. Indeed, we can say that the
Sephirah,
of Hesed is at the heart of the humanity desire to make a meaningful contribution to the world. In Kabbalah, Hesed is described through the metaphor of water. Just as water flows downwards from the higher ground, Hesed flows down from the union of
Chokhmah
and Bet
Bina.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Through the act of data. Like water, Hesed is associated with purity and pleasure. We bathe and we make clean. We drink water and are refreshed.
Beautiful. So there are many, many images associated with chesed. Elsewhere in the book, Label talks about white light for chesed versus red light for Devorah. Another one is water. But as we said, the attribute of chesed, it's the emotional flow of giving, of contributing, of extending yourself to another. Let's go on. Underlying.
Underlying all spiritual happiness lies a quality of giving, contribution, and service. This is why many spiritual tribes have a central tenet of their teaching, the concept of service. Rabbi Yitzhak of Troyes, known as acronym Rashi, notes that chesed underlies God's motivation to create the world. Kabbalah teaches that the human being is a microcosm of the universe. Even when we don't realize it consciously, each of us is motivated to contribute to the betterment of the world. This is central to the nature of creation and our own human nature.
Beautiful. So here's where the sefirot as mispar and the sefirot as sipur, if we understand them, we can actually leverage almost the dynamics of the universe in our favor, right? So the sefirot, as they are a matrix to create the universe, are the same as the sefirot that are flowing through me. And we learned that the universe started when God created the world. God said, "Let there be light," and that first day was chesed, right? When God said, "Let there be light," did God consider, are we going to mess it up? Are there going to be murders in the world? Is there going to be war? Is there going to be pollution? No, God just said, "Let there be light." I'm creating all of it, right? And that's the nature of chesed. Chesed simply contributes and does not consider what it is that it's contributing to. And I just lost my train of thought. Yes, now I got it. See, that landed again, right? So the universe is actually flowing, and the main flow is chesed. And now within me, if I decide, nah, I don't like chesed, right? I'm going to go for Devorah, I'm getting that kind of guy. I'm like at odds with how the universe is flowing around me. I'm not going with the current. Whereas if I lean on chesed and I decide I'm going to emulate the world around me, somehow now I'm flowing with the current, and my life around me is going to be more in sync. You ever have those times? There's some weeks where you're just in sync and everything flows and comes together. Some weeks where you're just against everything, or people like that. Right? So Label's saying here, the fabric of the universe begins with chesed, and so the fabric of our consciousness should also begin with chesed. We should lean and favor it. That being said, just chesed is really dysfunctional, and the best illustration of that, now it's getting cold. Okay, good. This is one of those classes. Okay, thank you. I'm glad we brought a jacket. So look at the life of Abraham, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob not only represent and are the best embodiment of each of these sefirot, Abraham for chesed, Isaac for Devorah, and Jacob for Tiferet, as we'll see, but in fact they were such an epitome that they opened up a channel for that sefirah to flow fully into the world. They were a complete channel, like just a chariot with no will of their own for each of their respective attributes. So Abraham's life was just all about chesed, right? He would just give himself. He would rush and find guests and bring them in. He'd just circumcise himself at how many years old, and he's sitting there healing from the circumcision, and 3 strangers walk by, and what does he do? No, come here, I have to feed you. Please, come here, I have to give, Right? What a crazy person, right? Who doesn't take time to rest after circumcising yourself in your 90s? Right? But this is chesed with no restraint. How was that funny? That wasn't.
Never really thought about that question.
This is what it was, right? And what happened? A little more serious. God comes to him and says, "Sacrifice your son Isaac." What does he say? Yeah, first thing in the morning. Okay, here we go, Isaac. Grab the wood. Here we go. Right? That's crazy. His wife Sarah, after she found out what happened, never spoke to him again and died. Right? So the Torah is not trying to teach us that chesed on its own is a good way to live. I mean, Abraham was a tzaddik, and we have to understand his actions in the terms of that. I don't want to get into another debate. I know what's coming. I see it brewing. That's not for this class. But the Torah is trying to show us chesed on its own is just extreme and dysfunctional. Right? You want me to sacrifice my son? Let me think about that, right? At least. Right? Not first thing in the morning. Not absolutely. That's a dysfunctional relationship. But his role was to bring chesed absolutely into the world in its fullest sense. So looking at it, it's very extreme. And in our lives, it's the same thing. If I'm all chesed, everything falls apart, right? My kids say, "Daddy, Daddy, we had 10 lollipops, can we have another one?" Of course, have another 10, right? "Daddy, Daddy, oh, that blade, that chainsaw looks fun to play with. Can I have that?" "Sure, have a chainsaw. Here you go," right? Pure chesed, I'm not considering whether the recipient is worthy, whether this is a wise thing to do. Just give. Right? So chesed on its own, love on its own, is actually not a proper way to live life. We need to balance it with the next sefirah, the next midah of gvura.
So regardless of the consequences of the love that's pouring out.
How do you mean?
And I was listening to you, and for me, I do a lot of visual imagery, and this loving kindness just pours out, and you said it's dysfunctional, and you gave examples of, oh, here's that chainsaw. So love without knowing the consequences of that love.
Exactly. Yeah. Love purely on its own. You want to favor love. Love wants to be the first flow, but you want to temper it with the next one, Devorah. Right? Very good. So let's look at. I had a picture of a woman doing karate, but my assistant Maya, who's Israeli, insisted that we use Wonder Woman. So here's our absolutely. That's a lot of Devorah there for many reasons.
That's a whole lot of Devorah.
It's a lot of Devorah. So Devorah is, mine just fell apart. I'll figure it out. Devorah is the opposite. If Chesed is this giving, contributing, Devorah is withholding, strength, and boundaries.
Isn't the Hebrew word for teacher Geveret?
Do we have an Israeli speaker in here? Yeah, I'm not. I mean, it's the Geveret is not like Mora, and More is the word for teacher. Geveret is more like sir and ma'am, right? So I think so. My Hebrew's not. You caught me there.
When I went to Hebrew school growing up in Southfield, it was like 4 days a week, and we called the female teachers Geveret something.
Yeah.
Mrs.
I thought
Yeah,
Devorah
I
is
think
woman, though.
I think it's like a term of address, but I have to check. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's usually related if it's the same root.
I think like this, maybe this is like the teacher part of, but maybe that's just because of.
No, yeah, it's all related. Yeah, if it's the same root, it's related. In this case, strangely, and you bring up a female teacher, strangely, chesed, loving kindness and giving, is considered the masculine side of the emotional world here. And Devorah, strength, is the feminine side of the emotional world. Which again, for North Americans, we don't always associate strength with the female side, but very much, if you remember the reproductive model, it's probably the most beautiful. Now we're getting a little cold. Did someone? Thanks.
The air conditioning's on.
We can't decide. So when a woman's having a baby, that strength with which the abdomen is pushing out, with which the womb is pushing out, which was the cervix. What's the word for the thing that pushes the thing? Baby, so I forgot the word. Sorry. Thank you, the uterus. There's a word there. So the uterus. You should see the looks I'm getting.
You haven't given birth, right?
Okay, no, I haven't. So the strength with which the uterus pushes out that baby, that's the model we want to think of, right? What stronger phenomenon is there in the world, in humanity, than that strength with which the female body can push out a baby? That sense of contraction, that's a feminine aspect. And we see it in the entire body, right? If I want to pull on something, what's happening to my muscle? It's not getting bigger, it's getting smaller, it's contracting. And same thing with my energy in life. If I feel like maybe I want to give this person $20 as asked me on the street, and then I look in their eyes and I think, I'm not sure what you're going to do with this $20, now I contract. And maybe I don't give the $20, maybe I give something else, a card, call me when you're in a rehab program, or I give them a sandwich. That's not a joke. That's not a joke. But I retract. I contract myself, right? So Devorah is that sense of feminine contraction, feminine strength, and feminine boundaries, and it's very much in counter distinction to Chesed. Let's visit Label's book. We're on page 132. And who are we at? Yeah, strength takes.
Strength takes many forms. Some of us are physically strong, or our strength may lie in our willpower. We may be strong-minded, or we may allow our feelings to flow strongly. Perhaps we have strong convictions. Our faith may be unshakable. The Kabbalah tells us that each of these forms of strength is connected by a common flow, the flow of Devorah. When we lift a load of groceries from the trunk of a car, the mind focuses and the muscles tighten. But beyond the engagement of mind and body lies the capacity to harness our inner resources. This is the domain of Devorah, the counterpart to Chesed.
Right, so here we're talking about physical strength primarily, but every way that the sefirot express is legitimate. So just because the body is physical doesn't mean that's not Devorah, right? When we tense our muscles, when we push on something or pull on something, we're expressing Devorah as well. Go ahead, the Sephirah.
The Sephirah of Devorah directs spiritual energy into a defined shape so it can achieve a goal. It harnesses and shapes dispersed energy into sharp relief. Its properties include concentration, discipline, and focus. Concentration limits the flow of ideas. For example, good teachers limit the flow of information so that it matches the capacity of their students. Devorah harnesses a teacher's natural tendency to give and share and matches it with the student's capacity to understand and absorb. When we restrain ourselves so others have the opportunity to express themselves, we are utilizing our Devorah flow. At these times, we screen the information or restrain its flow altogether. Flow screens out extraneous input and creates a narrow channel through which inner strength can flow. And discipline temporarily limits the spread of activity.
Beautiful. So all these concepts, discipline, restraint, these all have to do with Devorah. And we sometimes think, well, when I'm hearing this, loving kindness, that's the good one, and Devorah, that's the bad one, right? Or loving kindness, that's the nice one, and Devorah, that's the mean one, or something like that. And not at all. Not at all. These are both equally useful, equally important. We start with chesed, but Devorah is equally important, and Devorah is not the bad one, right? For instance, the sense of restraining myself so other people can have an experience, it comes to play in relationships, but certainly in our relationship with the Ein Sof, were the Ein Sof to allow its light, so to speak, to flow completely and for us to see the light of the Ein Sof entirely, were the Ein Sof not to restrain itself, what would happen? Our souls would be engulfed in this oneness, and then we'd realize that there actually were no beings here except the Ein Sof, because that's what that infinite oneness is. It's everything, right? The only reason you or I can have an experience of life and of growth and of relationship and feeling like I'm an entity with an experience is because the Ein Sof is restraining itself. If the Ein Sof said, sure, get to know me, here you go, arms around, take you back into the Ein Sof, boom, I'm gone. And then I have no experience. So which is nicer to me? The Ein Sof restraining itself so that I feel like I'm an independent entity, I can have an experience and learn and grow in my own way? Or just chesed flow? Ein Sof says, here's my spiritual light. Is it gonna cause your identity to just vanish? Yes, but here you go, right? So chesed in that case is not the more generous, really, of the two flows. The Devorah flow is there for me to actually have an experience. The Devorah is allowing me something. It's a gift. And you can also see it in human relationships, right? I mean, God willing, one day I'll have this class over to my house. I love having people over. I've had classes to visit the sukkah, et cetera, And how would I do it? This week I'd send out an email. Next week, come by my house, Friday night for Shabbos. Everybody's welcome. Here you go. Place is open. And then my wife would sit me down. She'd say, okay, what's in the house? How much food do we have? Who's coming? Is there room for them? Are they bringing their spouses? Is there anybody who's a vegetarian? Right? Are they going to be comfortable? Are they going to be, right? So here I am. I want to host, and I'm just chesed. I'm saying, yes, everybody, come on in, eat, please. I'm giving, right? But Devorah comes along and says, well, wait, if you really want to give to them, right, make sure you have room for them to sit, make sure you have food for them to eat, make sure they're going to be comfortable, make sure you know what's going on. And by actually restraining, you're actually taking them into consideration more. So it's not so simple as saying, chesed, loving kindness, that's the good one, and Devorah, well, only when we need to, right? Devorah actually is just as important. And one last piece before I go on. The inner experience of them has to do with love, and a word we don't use a lot in Reform Judaism, which is awe, or even fear. Right? Love and fear. So I have these two flows within my consciousness, and experiencing chesed and Devorah, the inner experience is love and awe. And again, spiritual seekers, we often like to lean on the side of love, and we feel like love is the answer, and love will raise us higher and higher and higher. In Kabbalah, first of all, it's not me that goes higher. right? I can't actually unite with the sefirot, ultimately. I can learn about them. I can learn to manipulate them more productively in my life. But my soul is my soul. My soul cannot unite with the sefirot and unite with the Ein Sof. What can are my actions, my mitzvot, and my learning, for various reasons. I'm not going to get into why that is, but the nature of a mitzvah is such that it's still part of the Ein Sof, never separate from the Ein Sof in the way my soul is, and it can actually rise and unite with the sefirot. But for those actions, for the way that I give charity and the way that I take care of my kids and the way that I come to temple and participate in services, for those mitzvahs to rise, they actually need not just love, they need something called awe. And it's considered, if an image is what you're looking for, it's considered like two wings on a bird. And for that bird to rise up and unite with the sefirot, and in fact create unifications in higher worlds that I'm not even aware of, I need both of them. And it's a little like, I don't know if you've been to the Redwoods. Has anyone here traveled in the Redwoods? What's the first feeling when you walk into the grove?
Awe.
It's absolutely awe, right? Oh my gosh.
But you used awe and fear in the same context. Awe, fear, there's two very different things, I feel like.
Yes, and there are different levels. So this is more complicated than I want to get to today, but in each side, love and fear, there's lower levels and higher levels and higher levels and higher levels. And each one has a different name, and each one is a different phenomenon. So the lowest level of fear, which is pachad, is actually that one, right? Oh, you know, when I'm 12 years old and I want to steal candy, well, you know, that's a sin. You know what happens, right? Oh, no, I don't want to be punished. Here's the candy back, right? So when you're immature, that's a useful tool to kind of get yourself on the right path. But as you mature, a higher level is yira, awe, which is more, look at these trees. They're as old as, they're like many generations in my family. They've been standing here, and they're so beautiful, and they're so complex. I'm in awe. And I don't want to hurt this ecosystem. I just want to stand here and just like touch them, but I'm very careful. And when we're in life, and when we're having our encounter with the Ein Sof through this lens of life, it is Devorah, it is that awe that gives us that sense of respect, right? That I'm not just gonna love every experience, no matter what it wants, right? I'm not going to, I have a meal in front of me, and I love food, and so here I'm going to eat it. I'm not going to share. I'm going to eat more of it. I'm going to eat more than I need. I'm going to eat whatever I want. I'm going to eat whenever I want. I love it, love it, love it. But do I have respect for that this is a creation, this is something that's flowing out of the Ein Sof, and I shouldn't eat more than I need, and I should perhaps eat it with something we call a blessing in Judaism, which helps elevate it, and I should use that energy to do something good and have that in mind, right? Or in relationships, obviously, right? If I'm a young man and I love some woman, I don't just run up and say, I love you, and arms around. That's horrible, right?
It didn't work for me.
Exactly, right? You approach them with a sense of respect, and you wait to see what's the appropriate distance. So if I just love the person, it's destruction. If I have love with awe, with respect, now it's a balance. And so in Reform Judaism and in sort of modern spirituality, we tend not to favor awe, but in Kabbalah, it is a powerful, powerful tool, and we actually want to become skilled at it and masters of it because it's an equal balance.
Would it be fair to say that Devorah is the regulator?
Absolutely, yeah. So where chesed is flowing, now Devorah says, just till here, just this much, just this quality, etc., etc. So chesed and Devorah, we want to actually use them in tandem. Chesed is contributing while Devorah is assessing and saying, just until this point, this is the right amount. But the problem is chesed and Devorah are always resisting each other, right? So lest we think our emotional world should be just, okay, this is 80% chesed, 20% Devorah. Now this one's 70% Devorah, 30% chesed. That's not how it works. They actually combine to form a third flow, and that flow is Tiferet. I'm not going to tell that joke. I'm looking at it. I don't think the room is right for it. What do you think? The joke is, I'm a walking economy. My hairline is in recession. My stomach is a victim of inflation. And together they're putting me in a deep recession. It's a terrible joke for this, don't you think? I shouldn't tell that joke. You're right. Thank you. So Tiferet is actually that third flow. And we call it, on the one hand, beauty, because beauty is a combination of opposites, right? If I have just white paint and I try and make a painting, okay, maybe I will. If I have just red paint and I try and make a painting, okay, maybe. But if I have the two colors, now I can make something truly beautiful. So in many ways, beauty is the combination of opposites to create something that is harmonized. And that's exactly what Tiferet does with Chesed and Devorah, right? Whereas Chesed is just perhaps this white light, this giving contribution, and Devorah is this strength and withholding. Tiferet, its inner sense is compassion. And compassion actually takes all of it into account, right? How so? Say a judge has somebody in front of them, and they realize that this person really doesn't deserve to be let off the hook. They've done bad things, right? Chesed flow will just say, whatever, let him off the hook, I don't care, right? But I feel bad putting somebody behind bars. I feel bad, so go ahead, you're free, Chesed. Devorah would say, hold on, by the law, this person deserves to be in jail for a long time, and you should give him the full sentence. Tiferet will say, you know what? I recognize what Devorah is saying. I recognize that this person really doesn't deserve my benevolence as a judge here. But even recognizing that, I'm going to have compassion on them. I'm going to say, you know what? Something inside me tells me the right thing to do is just parole or let them off with something or community service. It's a compassionate response. And compassion is taking into account both. It's taking into account the generosity of Chesed, but it's also saying, yeah, I get this person doesn't deserve it. So compassion actually doesn't resist anything. Compassion is the whole picture. So its exterior is beauty, and its interior is compassion. And let's take labels approach here. So page 150, the flow of compassion.
If we could not achieve harmony between our giving and withholding natures, our inner emotional climate would be chaotic. We would be constantly in a state of war with ourselves. Without balance, we would find our chesed flow overpowering our Devorah, or vice versa. Of course, we all have experienced some level of emotional indecision and the physical exhaustion that accompanies it. By and large, most of us are able to resolve the dilemma through the flow of Tiferet. In individuals whose flow of Tiferet is lacking or untrained, this issue becomes a real emotional problem that requires guidance and counseling.
And so label brings a point that in life we have to have one emotion that allows us to behave in an integrated way. And the problem sometimes is, well, I've got this chesed flow and this Devorah flow, and I don't know which one to go with, right? So now I'm this, I'm extreme this way, I'm extreme this way. When we learn to ignite our flow Tiferet and to allow chesed and Devorah to flow into it to create a new emanation, that allows us to have one balanced feeling that takes everything into account, and then we can be most masterful in our responses.
The Sephirah of Sephirah provides a harmonizing influence. It blends Hesed and Devorah, just as Diad balances Chokmah and Bina. Diad results in the harmony and creativity of thought development. Sephirah results in compassion. Compassion is not a simple feeling, but a composite of many elements. Compassion arises when we choose to give despite circumstances that might not warrant it. For example, a judge may weigh circumstances and choose compassion over harsh judgment. Parents who understand that their child's disruptive behavior is a result of emotional upheaval may choose to be compassionate rather than punitive. The benefactor may be compassionate in his contribution to a man who has poor financial management skills, yet struggles to overcome his limitations.
Right, so now we move into actual decisions in the world, and we do want to find a way to balance our interactions, right? If I'm always giving, then I just burn myself out and I wind up not being able to contribute to anyone. If I'm always withholding and saving myself, then what's the point of my gifts? I'm never going to contribute them. So we want to find a balance where Tiferet guides us so we can contribute and restrain in the right amounts. And one more in each.
In each of these instances, we see an element of withdrawal. The judge understands that a crime has been committed. The parent understands that the child has been rude. And the benefactor understands that mismanagement of funds has occurred. But at the same time, this Devorah withdrawal from the unacceptable behavior finds compensation through the Hesed bond of connection and empathy. Sephirah refuses the two flows. Ideally, it favors Hesed and kindness, resulting in a new amalgamation. Just as a painter combines the primary colors of the blue and yellow to form a new color, green, so too compassion is the result of the need for discipline and management softened and modulated by kindness and open-heartedness. If we were to withdraw Devorah from the mix, we would be left with giving that was undirected and undisciplined, giving without sense of balance. On the other hand, if we were to delete Hesed, we would be left with a bitter brew of harsh discipline and rigid withholding.
Compassion is not weakness, it is strength, right? Tiferet provides the opportunity to create an emotional balance in the moment. So yes.
I got a problem with this passage.
Okay.
Sephirah fuses the two flows. Ideally, it favors chesed and kindness.
Well, yeah, that's what I started. That you do want to consider Devorah, but like we said, the fabric of the universe begins with chesed. So in the end, like, I don't want to be 50-50, but I want to be more like 40-60.
But that sounds like a total human intervention here. So if we're going to go with this as all coming from a higher purpose, a higher being, whatever.
Yeah.
And these two flows are equally important. How can this author say ideal? This is his interpretation. This is all coming from the author who says, ideally it favors Hesed and kindness. I disagree. I don't understand how he can write everything he wrote and then make the judgment, ideally it favors Hesed.
Okay, so I mean, I would never argue with someone that felt they want to be 50-50. I get what you're saying. And maybe I'm
not saying 50-50. I'm just saying one doesn't exist without the other. So how can he say, ideally it favors Hesed? No, he just taught us that it's got to be both.
Yes, well, I may have misspoke when I said they're really equally important. All of our sources, and this is what he's getting at, like, for instance, the creation story, it didn't start with Devorah. And we even have in the Midrash, it says, God thought about starting with Devorah and creating the world with justice and realized the world couldn't exist. So instead, God created with chesed. And chesed being the first day, I may have overstated that they're exactly equal. You're always, even in creation, chesed is seen as the primary flow, and Abraham is the first of the patriarchs. So without Devorah, chesed is just going to be lost and dysfunctional. But once you got them both, he's not making that up. That's not his editorial comment. It really, Kabbalah and the sources do say chesed should be the first, and you should always kind of favor it a little, because that's, like we said, that's the fabric of the universe. But you don't have to agree.
Who am I?
Who are we? But let's look.
I didn't write the book, but I don't agree. It doesn't make sense to me.
Good. Okay. Good. So let's finish by getting back to what we started with in terms of nefesh elokit, nefesh ba'amit. So all these flows, each of our souls has access to them. Right? So again, even though these are spiritual realities and want to become acquainted with them and learn to articulate them, and it's very useful, at every point you want to say, which soul is right now flowing with chesed? Which soul is flowing with Devorah, and why? Which soul is experiencing compassion? Compassion for who? For me or for the other person? Right? And you can kind of tell by what typically comes up, because each of the souls flows through the Sephirah with a different result. For instance, chesed, when the divine soul is charging through chesed, it usually creates loving contribution, other-centeredness. How can I take care of another person? What can I do for you? When chesed is flowing with the energy of nefesh ba'amit, it takes that and it turns it into, let's say, inappropriate desires. So I really love this food, I'm going to eat it every day, right? I really love looking at this stuff. I love watching TV. I love having cars. whatever it might be, all that stuff is fine in context. It's good to have a nice car. It's good to have a beautiful partner. It's good to have wonderful meals. But if that's what I'm about, if that's all I want, if that's what I think about, if that's what I love, now you might stop and say, hold on, that's nefesh ba'amit that's flowing through chesed, right? That's not the chesed that's going to bring me to a higher place. And same with gevura, right? An appropriate boundary. Oh, hold on, this person doesn't seem like they're good for my family. Let me put a little boundary. I'm not sure this person is deserving of this. Let me put a boundary. If it's for someone else's good, that's nefesh elokit using gevura. But if it's coming from me, often it comes out just as anger, right? Having a boundary because my version of the world is the one that I think is right, not what's happening around me. And finally, tiferet as well, compassion that's expressed for an other-centered reason, that's nefesh elokit. But if it's going towards me, now it turns into something like boasting or vanity. I'm having a lot of compassion with myself, as it were. So as we learn about all these sefirot, please keep in mind this organizing factor. The soul that has the spark of chokhmah, that's the soul that's now going to run through my intellect. It's going to inspire my emotions. And now the chesed that's flowing, it may be the chesed of this direction. Right? And it can be very powerful, and it can be very intuitive, and it can be very spiritual, it can be a lot of things, pleasurable, but it may not be the direction I want to go to ultimately get closer to God, which is not always in the spiritual. So a lot of information. Let's finish with just a very quick, if anyone's comfortable meditating, this is optional to close your eyes, and at home as well. But before we do, take one look at those candles. Yeah, this beautiful light on Hanukkah. And we see the oil and the wick and the two colors of the flame. If you take that image and close your eyes and just allow your breath to slow down. And bring the awareness of your senses to your mind. What are you hearing? Perhaps the picture of those candles in your inner mind's eye. The feeling of the air against your skin. And see if your mind can just settle, something like a snow globe. All the moving parts coming to rest. If it's not there already, bring to mind a vision of that Hanukkah lamp. Right? The divine concept. The lamp of God is the soul of man, from Proverbs. The lamp of God is the soul of man. And just see that wick, recognize that your body is something like that wick. And the oil that's flowing through that wick is something like your inspiration. It soaks through you, and it gives your soul the pure color of its flame. And recognize these two colors of flame surrounding you, as it were, and filling you. One white light of your divine soul, always yearning to reunite with its source, but often surrounding consciousness. And then the dark radiance of that blue light consuming your body and igniting your actual mind, your actual heart to seek, to learn, and finally to contribute. As you feel the flame of your two souls around you, just recognize that during Hanukkah, each of us has places of darkness in the world that are ours to illuminate. And the two flames of our soul, when they ignite, the darkness simply vanishes. There's no struggle. The darkness was just the absence of this soul, and now it's here. And let your breathing return to normal. When you're ready, open your eyes. And I wish you a wonderful, a lichtige, joyful Hanukkah. And any questions, hang out. I'm here, and I hope that during this week, start to get a sense of which of our souls are flowing at every moment. Thank you.
I'm thinking about yin and yang.
Yes.
That's the analogy that I come up with, or the similar tradition that I come up with.